You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
So it's not just the dogs and the cats, not just the pets.
It's not just the dogs and the cats. They're full-on vampires. They love the taste of human flesh and they drink human blood.
For years, there were whispers. Not the kind you hear in interviews or award speeches, but the kind that move quietly behind the scenes. The kind people laugh at, until they don't. Because sometimes the most unbelievable stories don't come from outsiders looking in, they come from the people who were already inside. And that's what makes this story different. Two names, two voices, both from the heart of Hollywood itself, Elijah Wood and Corey Feldman. They didn't start out as whistleblowers. They started as kids chasing dreams. But somewhere along the way, those dreams turned into something else, something darker.
I can tell you that the number one problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia. That's the biggest problem for children in this industry.
And when they tried to speak about it, nobody wanted to listen. They were laughed at, questioned, dismissed. But here's the twist. Time has a strange way of bringing old words back to life. Because years later, as new scandals began to surface, people started going back to old interviews, back to uncomfortable statements, back to warnings that once sounded crazy. And suddenly, they didn't sound so crazy anymore. Because this isn't just a story about rumors, it's about power, silence, and what happens when the people who know too much decide to speak anyway.
You're cast out. You are scorned, you are shunned, you don't exist. You are effectively dead.
To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the beginning, before the headlines, before the internet theories, back to when Hollywood was just a dream for two young boys trying to make it.
I was surrounded by them when I was 14 years old. Surrounded. Literally. Didn't even know it. It wasn't until I was old enough to realize what they were and what they wanted and what they were about and the types of people that were surrounding me. Till I went, oh my God, they were everywhere like vultures.
Elijah Wood entered the industry at a young age. Soft-spoken, talented, and widely loved, he became one of the most recognizable faces in the world after starring in The Lord of the Rings. To the public, he was the definition of success. But growing up in Hollywood means growing up fast. It means seeing things earlier than you should. And sometimes it means understanding things you wish you didn't. Years later, Elijah would describe parts of the industry in a way that made people uncomfortable. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse directly. He chose his words carefully.
Send pizza to Bobby. May I bring in your side of pizza to you? Respectfully, Daphne. What do you mean here, Daphne? Hi, Barry. Can you please meet Jeffrey at 12:45 p.m. at the corner of Lex and 83rd? You will then walk 1 block to a pizza place. I wanted to let you know that the crew really appreciated the pizza today. Thank you for letting us do that. Okay, maybe that one is actually pizza, right? The crew, the whole crew. Oh God, it makes my stomach sick. Hi, Jojo. Jeffrey would like you to go to Toro's today and buy a large cheese pizza for Bobby. Slayton is staying at 301 and deliver it to the apartments. He will be there when it opens, and when they order the pizza, then deliver to 301. Bobby may or may not be there.
But one word stood out: vipers. Not one person, not one incident, a pattern, a type of person drawn to power. At the same time, on a completely different path, Corey Feldman was living a very different reality. Corey wasn't just a child star, he was one of the biggest names of the 80s. Movies, fame, attention, he had it all. But behind that success, there was pain. Real pain.
How's everybody doing?
For decades, Corey tried to tell people that something was wrong in Hollywood. He talked about abuse, about exploitation, about powerful figures taking advantage of young actors. And what happened? He was dismissed, labeled unstable, turned into a joke. But here's what makes this story even more complicated. Corey never changed his story, not once.
You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
So it's not just the dogs and the cats, not just the pets.
It's not just the dogs and the cats. They're full-on vampires. They love the taste of human flesh and they drink human blood.
Through interviews, documentaries, and public appearances, he kept repeating the same message. Something was wrong, and it wasn't isolated. It was a system. Now here's where things take a turn.
And in comes a big movie star, and with him, his date, who was a 12-year-old boy.
12-year-old boy, and this is what we keep hearing a lot more of, having these very young, I guess, boys and girls being dates or escorts with these highly famous people.
Because as time passed, the internet started connecting dots that traditional media ignored, and some of those dots led to very disturbing theories. Let's be clear, these claims are not proven facts. They are allegations and online speculation that have spread widely without verified evidence.
But the reason they continue to gain attention is because of the environment they exist in: secrecy, influence, and unanswered questions. Names like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey began appearing in online discussions, not because of confirmed involvement, but because the internet tends to pull powerful figures into broader narratives. And then there's Jeffrey Epstein, a case that changed everything.
I think it goes to the royals of the world, the kings and queens. That's how they get there.
Because Epstein wasn't a theory. He was real, a powerful man with connections to some of the most influential people in the world, operating for years before being exposed. And that's when public perception started shifting, because if something like that could exist, what else could?
When I went to my label and sat down, there was just this big dark cloud over the meeting. And they were just like, why did you say that? Like, why did you do that? Like the shame and utter disappointment really like could throw your career in the blender with that type of information. You know what I'm saying? Well, it's like they're literally programming us to behave a certain type of.
But here's the twist nobody expected. Elijah Wood never spoke about extreme rituals. Corey Feldman never claimed anything about cannibalism. What they did talk about was abuse, manipulation, and a system that protects itself. And somehow, those real, serious issues got mixed into something bigger, more sensational, and far more controversial. And that's where the story becomes dangerous. Because when real experiences get blended with unproven claims, it becomes harder to separate truth from exaggeration.
It was filled with all of these rules that were never written down anywhere, but everyone knew the rules. And everyone passed these rules on to you. Female agents were big in my life, and they had definitely a hand in telling me the rules that I had to abide by, which is by definition a cult.
And that confusion benefits one thing above all else: silence. Because if everything sounds unbelievable, nothing gets taken seriously. And that's exactly what happened to Corey for years. People didn't just ignore him, they discredited him. And once someone is labeled as unreliable, everything they say after that gets questioned, even if parts of it are true. But then, something shifted. The world started paying attention to abuse in powerful industries. Movements began. Stories came out. Victims were finally being heard.
You are cast out. You are scorned. You are shunned. You don't exist. You are effectively dead.
And suddenly, Corey Feldman didn't look like a joke anymore. He looked like someone who had been speaking too early, too soon for people to understand. And Elijah Wood? His quiet warnings started to feel heavier. Because when someone inside the system uses words like vipers, it makes you wonder what they saw that made them choose that word. But here's where the emotional weight really hits.
Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
Because beyond all the theories, beyond all the speculation, there are real people in this story. People who grew up in an environment they didn't fully understand. People who trusted the wrong individuals. People who paid the price for speaking up. Imagine being a child in an industry where everyone around you holds power, where your success depends on staying quiet, where speaking out could cost you everything. That's the reality Corey described, and that's why his story matters, regardless of what people believe about the more extreme claims. Because at its core, this isn't about wild theories. It's about vulnerability. It's about trust. And it's about what happens when that trust is broken. And then comes the hardest part to accept.
Warning, do not do it. Do not come at me. Do not come at us. Because yes, you are powerful men, but you're using traditional methods of shame. You have hacked me, you have stalked me, you have spied on me, you've stolen 125 pages of my book, assaulting me. No, absolutely not, I won't have it.
Because the real question isn't whether every rumor is true. The real question is, why do these stories keep appearing? Why do so many people from different backgrounds and different times describe similar patterns? Powerful individuals, young talent, silence, control. That pattern alone is enough to make people uncomfortable, and maybe it should. Because in the end, this story isn't about proving every claim. It's about understanding the environment that allows certain things to happen in the first place. It's about recognizing that power, when left unchecked, creates spaces where people can be hurt and where speaking out becomes dangerous. Elijah Wood didn't scream. Corey Feldman didn't stop talking. And somewhere between those two approaches lies a truth that people are still trying to understand. So what does all of this mean? Maybe it means not everything you hear is true, but also not everything you hear is false. Maybe it means the loudest stories aren't always the most important ones, and sometimes the quiet warnings matter more. Because in a world full of noise, it's easy to miss the voices that are actually trying to tell you something real.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Not who to believe, but how to listen. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come as a headline. It comes as a warning, ignored at first, questioned later, and understood only when it's too late. And that leaves us with one final question. If people were speaking all along, why did it take so long for anyone to hear them? And when you step back from everything, all the rumors, all the headlines, all the noise, one thing becomes very clear. This story was never just about Hollywood. It was about power. It was about who gets protected and who gets ignored. Because whether you believe every claim or not, you can't ignore the pattern. You can't ignore the fact that for years, voices tried to speak up, and most of the world chose not to listen. Some were laughed at, some were silenced, and some were simply forgotten. But here's the part that really stays with you. What if even a small piece of what they were saying was true? What if behind the glamour, behind the fame, behind the perfect image, there were people struggling in silence, hoping someone would finally hear them? That's what makes the story so heavy. Not the theories, not the speculation, but the possibility that real pain was overlooked for far too long. Because history has shown us something again and again. The truth doesn't always come out the way we expect. It doesn't always sound clean or easy to understand. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes it gets buried under louder, more sensational stories. But eventually, it finds its way back. And maybe that's where we are right now. A moment where people are starting to question more, to look deeper, to listen a little closer, not just to the loudest voices, but to the ones that were ignored. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about celebrities, it's about a system that rewards silence and punishes those who speak. And the real question is, has anything actually changed? Or are the same patterns still repeating, just in different ways? That's something only time will answer. But one thing is certain, stories like this don't just disappear. They evolve, they come back, and they leave behind questions that refuse to be ignored. So as you walk away from this video, don't just focus on what you heard. Think about what it means. Think about why these conversations keep happening. And most importantly, think about who benefits when people stop asking questions. Because sometimes a most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to look away. If this video made you think or opened your eyes even a little, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and pushes these conversations further. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's always more to uncover, more stories to tell, and more truths waiting just beneath the surface. I'll see you in the next one.